Hi, my name is Dana Gornell, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Tattooed Buddha. We're here today to discuss sexual misconduct in the Buddhist community. A while back, we had a panel very much like this, discussing the same issue, and we felt it was time to revisit that. We're here today with Brent Purple Oliver, Michelin Bradley, Kelly Shore, and Gary Sanders. Thank you very much for being here.
Well, I guess we could talk for just a second about maybe the direction we're interested in having this discussion go, just as a cohesive bubble in time. Noah Levine and the controversy and subsequent closing of ATS is kind of what has sparked this, especially since there's been some recent activity with Spirit Rock withdrawing his credentials. And then, of course, the Sakyong continues to baffle everyone following the case with his absurd and transcendently crazy behavior. But, you know, this has been a motif in religion since essentially religion has started. Someone in a position of power, either knowingly or unknowingly, perpetuating harm from the seat that they sit in. My experience is specifically with Noah Levine and the Against the Stream community. I've never been really involved with one. I've been to the ATS in Nashville, where I met Noah Levine, and it was one of the most transformative and moving experiences of my spiritual life and my Buddhist practice. And that creates a lot of dissonance for me with everything that's happening. So kind of where I'm coming from this is I don't have trouble believing the allegations or believing that he could have done it. It's not an idealistic thing like, oh no, it never could have been done, but it's just more the confusion and the hurt and the horror that is putting me kind of in the middle of all this, even though I haven't been very vocal. You know, it's almost possible just to stake out one of the sides who are shouting at each other and just lay your claim to that and say, this is what I represent. It's so much more nuanced than that and so much more scary as a whole that I've never been comfortable just casting my lot with one side and saying, this is what I feel and I'm going to defend it. There's too much going on for that to be the easy way out.
You know, that was, I guess, my position in the beginning. And I'll just say, for those of you that don't know me, I mean, I trained, I lived in Los Angeles. I did Facilitator 1 and Facilitator 2 training. I'm one of the founders of Refuge Recovery. So I was there at, day one. Me and my friend Jordan Kramer led the very first meeting at the Melrose ATS location. So, I was heavily involved. And, and I'll say when the news first broke, I really relied on that beginner's mind, idea that, like, I wasn't there. I didn't see this. And, and I was, at the time I was saying, I only knew Noah when he was married, and I'd never seen him do anything. Again, this is the story I was saying at the time. I never saw him do anything inappropriate with women. I never saw anybody sexually harassed. And, and then as time has gone on and the way things played out and the more that I kind of thought about it, and, and I thought about some of the reasons why I personally intentionally backed away from the whole Dharma punks and Against the Stream scene there in LA. I didn't like the boys club aspect of it. I didn't like the fact that I heard time and again women that specifically had gone through facilitator training and teacher training, people that were empowered as teachers, had all mostly had removed themselves willingly because they didn't feel supported, that they were made to feel crazy, that they were anytime they raised an issue, that was pointed, they were told that they had daddy issues. And so, I didn't want to continue on with that aspect of it. I look like I belong in that, or, I'm tall, I'm big, I'm heavily tattooed. I got a loud voice. I can play with the boys easily, but I'm also a father with two, I got a daughter in college and a daughter in high school. And, and as the years went on and as my practice deepened, as I became more of a, you know, more that became, I don't know, representative of you know, this path, you know, I didn't want to be a part of anything that didn't encourage women, that didn't support women. So, you know, as this situation is rolled out, and as I watched, you know, Noah and his supporters, you know, deny and refuse and you know, and just outright, you know, fight both peer and elder recommendations. You know, I have chosen a side. You know, I can't sit in the middle and say like, well, I don't know. No, I do know. You know, and you know, and where I sit right now, you know, I'm an empowered teacher now. You know, I'm a teacher here at Portland Insight. I have responsibilities. I have, you know, I have my teacher, Robert Beatty, oversees me, and then I'm on a teacher council. I have responsibilities, and I have to be a good steward to this lineage that I'm a part of. And, you know, and to see the amount of confusion and denial and the continuance of harm going on, I can't stand by idly.
Well, that's a valuable and honorable position, because I'm, you know, sitting here in central Kentucky in the middle of nobody gives a fuck Buddhism, you know. All I'm going on is the stuff
I'd say that's debatable, but yeah, okay, I'll let you know.
You know what? I'd like to just, so I actually went through Facilitator 1 and Facilitator 2. When I started Facilitator 2, that was when I did Facilitator 1 and 2 with Joanna and Vinny. And I removed myself after Facilitator 2. But to be clear, ATS was not my primary Buddhist home. I'm also a member of the Order of Inner Being, and I live 20 minutes away from Deer Park, and so Thich Nhat Hanh is my primary lineage, and if anything, I considered ATS to be my secondary. But I felt very connected there, and when this all started, my very first reaction was to actually write to Mary and say, I can't, like, there's no way that this is actually going on. And she wrote back and said, okay, well, we're going forward with this investigation. And then things really umbrellaed. And actually, umbrellaed is not the right term. It more like exploded. And then as things have come down, as ATS closed, as Refuge closed, and most recently with, you know, Noah's responses have changed dramatically in the past year. And in preparing for tonight, I went through the past correspondence, and I was on the panel responding to his initial, you know, public talk after the announcement of the closure of ATS. And the way that that has changed, the way that his words have changed has made me really reconsider how all of this is actually going down. And, you know, trying to remain neutral is really difficult when you see that dramatic change from I didn't understand the power dynamic to I was falsely accused. And but it's not even Noah, it really is the Sangha, because the three jewels are Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Noah's not in there. So it's not the world according to Noah, it is the world according to Buddha, and the teachings according to Buddha, and the community. And so it's the community response that makes me feel very much, and I have said this so many times, and to each and every single one of you, like, I need a bath and bleach. Because it's the attacks on the women who came forward. It's the expectation that the Buddhist community would have an open investigation where every piece would be examined by the general public who is involved with this, which is not how that goes. When you take vows in a lineage, your job at that point is to do what your teacher says. That's it. If your teacher says you need to step back and not teach for a while and not be in front of, not be on the cushion in the front for a little while, then that's what you do. It's not, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go and do something else because that's what I want to do, because I don't think that that's fair and I don't think that that's right. And that's where the problems really come in, is, when Suzuki Roshi came to the US, he washed dishes for a year so that he could learn the language and be able to communicate with the Sangha. Maybe it's time for Noah to go wash some dishes.
I just wanted to say something here too. And this is something we've talked about before in the last panel, that there's this power dynamic thing that happens, and it seems to be not just in Buddhism, but in teacher-student relationship, boss-employee relationship, priest versus parishioner. It just seems to happen over and over and over again. And when this first happens, when these kind of stories break, we tend to go with the person. I shouldn't say we. A lot of people tend to go with the person who is being accused over the person who is accusing almost every time. And a story
Right.
just recently broke in Catholicism where a cardinal was just convicted of sexually assaulting 2 boys back in 1996, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about that story is that people tended to back up these boys who are now men faster than they back up women who are accusing them. So I just find it interesting that we're quick to say, well, yeah, maybe she's just saying that. So,
well, I think one of the things, and as you look at the collapse in Shambhala community, which is what I'm more averse in, and ATS and the Catholic Church, is that sense that people have about what they have received, that sense of gratefulness or gratitude or just authority. We're sort of trained in Western culture to lift up and to revere authority. And so we get really edgy when we start to see cracks in that. And in looking at both ATS and Shambhala, the thing that I hear the community saying, the things that break my heart are things like, well, we just need to separate the teacher from the teachings, and the teachings are okay. And I can't express how concerned I am about that comment, not because in and of itself is dangerous, but the way it's used to sort of brush off the systemic problem of power and abuse can be very dangerous. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of it. The best analogy I can think of, it's like drinking warm vegetable soup out of a bowl that's glazed with lead. Mm. And you're drinking it, and it's warm, and it's good for you, and you're actually getting good things from this soup. Most of the teaching these people have taught are life affirming, are, as Brent says, transforming things. And so you're drinking this soup, you feel that it's wonderful, it's actually doing things to you, and all the while you're slowly being poisoned.
Yeah.
And you're reluctant to let that bowl go. Maybe it's a cherished bowl. Maybe it was your grandmother's bowl when they did everything with lead. Maybe you're afraid that you won't have another container. But as long as you keep that bowl and drink that soup out of it, you are going to continue to be poisoned. And so it to me is a matter of understanding that in this power dynamic, where people get caught is that feeling of gratitude, that feeling of warmth, that feeling of health, because a lot of these leaders have told people things that are absolutely true and they're absolutely helpful to them. at the same time, part of Buddhism, a big part of Buddhism, is getting rid of the delusion. And the delusion is that, you know, a bowl with lead is going to poison you whether the soup is good for you or not. Eventually, that tide is going to turn. And the other thing that I hear the community saying is this kind of misconception that we get that, well, you know, well, Noah has basic goodness, the Sakyong has basic goodness, we should just go on. And nobody's suggesting that the bowl isn't a good bowl, but it's poisoned. And until it can be repaired or replaced or something, it has no business holding your soup. And these teachers have no business teaching until significant, and the Spirit Lock Writer is very clear about that. If there is a significant change, we will welcome you back. Shambhala is going through an entire systemic collapse. And there's not a clearer picture for what they're enduring other than a lot of confusion about the issue of power and the issue of lineage as a whole. But I think that's where a part of that power, people siding with power, as Dana, is most people are looking at what they're holding in their own hands. And if what they're holding is cherished, it's very hard to let that bowl go.
And everyone, I think, feels, even if they know that the bowl could do them harm over the long haul, or they feel maybe they can fix it for the short term. We saw the same thing, I mean, not personally because I wasn't involved, but with Sasaki Roshi out in California. You know, he lived to be, 105, 106, and was sexually predatory pretty much up until the very end. And it came to light after he had died that quite a few people in the inner circle of the community were well aware of it, but they were completely uncertain as to how to handle it without ripping the community that he had built apart. And, you know, I can see that in Against the Stream and Shambhala as well. The people involved who we want to lay blame on for knowing about things and not doing anything about it have perhaps been struggling mightily themselves with the right way to handle this in a way that would not cause more harm than had already been caused. Not that that necessarily excuses a lack of action, just the idea that so many of us that have been involved in these communities that have become so important to us, watching them come apart. And ATS came apart overnight. Like, it was there and then it was done. And Shambhala has suffered setback after setback since Chogyam Trungpa, and the Sakyong looked to be a different person when he ascended to his weird Shambhala throne. But now it turns out that it's just as bad as it was before, and they're taking so much longer to implode because they're an international organization that's been around for so long. But yeah, you know, there are good people embedded in all of these communities that have known things are going on that I'm sure have been struggling with finding a skillful and wise way to try to handle this. But I think something that most of us have agreed on kind of before we started this call is one of the biggest bitches here is the way the communities are handling it, not just the way the people in power are handling their accusations, which I'm sure any of us.
And that is also very multidimensional. And the way that the communities are handling it is, it circles very much back to what Dana said. And I love Kelly's analogy about the lead bowl, but it circles very much back to what Dana said about it's not believing the women. It's, so there are multiple layers to that and multiple levels to that, because like Dana brought up, and as we discussed before we started this recorded call, you know, the movie Spotlight talked about the abuses within the Catholic Church, and it was the boys, and the boys were believed. And we have women who are coming forward and being decried, denied, disbelieved, pushed aside. I even, in one discussion that I was having with someone, the actual statement that happened out loud was, "I've been raped more times than I can count." And I just was like, Okay, well, and how you handle yourself with that speaks volumes. And where does it stop? When do we say, like Kelly said, we can't just allow it to continue. We have to take a strong stance.
How much of this, like, I guess as I'm posing this kind of question to the group, I know where I stand. How much of this do you all feel is an issue with the top-down hierarchical form of religion, that we imported it fairly directly from the East in our Buddhism, and it's always been here in the West in the form of the Catholic Church specifically, which is usually the one in the spotlight, although they're not the only ones that are guilty from in the Christianity sphere. But either I'm not up on the information, or it's being carefully guarded, or it's just not out there. But in most secular Buddhist communities and secular mindfulness communities, things like MBSR and things in the West where it's much more community oriented, where people are much more equal and there is less in the way of ranking, this seems to happen far less. So to me, the biggest issue seems to be this top-down form of spirituality where someone is granted authority by an authority figure to be an authority, and the people under them submit to the authority for their spiritual lives. You know, I've asked Noah a dozen questions over the past 10 years, and he has answered all of them wisely and in ways that have deeply affected my practice. I was going to a spiritual authority. I was giving him power and saying, I need help with this. Whereas more of the Western secular communities tend to go to a group of their peers for things like that and say, has anybody been through this? Can somebody help me with this? So there's no surrendering, or there's not as much surrendering. But it really seems like this top-down hierarchical version of spirituality grants power to a few, and that's kind of where it ends.
Well, and that's very interesting, because I think that different schools of Buddhism are set up in different ways. Because if you look at the Thich Nhat Hanh model, he has not, named a singular successor. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the teachings of the Buddha, he did not name a singular successor. He said, be a light unto yourself.
Right. To people who had been practicing as monastics for most of their lives.
But it's the same with, 46 generations later in this lineage on this side. I can't speak to Shambhala. I can only speak to the lineage that I know.
Well, aren't we seeing an evolution of, how this is developed through the West? I mean, Jack Kornfield isn't the be all end all. He, it's his name on Spirit Rock, but there's the ear council, there's the teachers council.
See, but I think that for me, Sharon is the be all end all, not Jack.
Well, she is for IMS, and I'll say, Sharon's a friend of mine and a teacher, and I love her. She's one of my favorite people on earth. But as this is developed, as awareness is built, has cultivated around these issues about power, about sexual misconduct, about misappropriation of money and whatnot, there are systems being in place that it's not just one person in charge of everything. There's committees and there's investigations and there's just the way that information is passed these days, there's very little that can be hid for very long. So I don't know, I don't think it's I don't think it's broken. It's just evolving. And I will say that just kind of going back to what was brought up a little bit before, the perception of how this is being handled is just that, perception, I'd say. You know, there is a small faction of people that are very vocal online that are supporting things one way or another. And you know, just the reality is, you know, just because I'm so connected within the refuge recovery communities worldwide, the vast majority of people are not so wrapped up in this, not so triggered by this, not so you know, up in arms about this. You know, the communities are still going strong. People are still supporting people. People are still, you know, finding freedom, you know, little tastes at a time. And, you know, and here we are. So, you know, and the one thing that I keep coming to, if it wasn't, and I'm speaking specifically about this situation about Against the Stream, and then, you know, I'm bringing in Refuge Recovery because that was such a big part of it, and that's what I'm, you know, quite involved with. You know, if it wasn't this, it'd be something else. So it's not so much about these particular acts. I'd say, you know, the bigger picture, I'd say what happened is horrible. You know, again, as a father, if these kind of things happen to one of my daughters, I would do probably some very illegal and violent things. You know, I'm honest about that. You know, I don't think I'd leave it up to a legal system. You know, and I'll also say the way that Noah has handled this specifically, when he was first asked to be suspended, or he wasn't asked to be suspended. he was suspended from teaching while this investigation went on and Against the Stream. And then when he first did that retreat at Brighton Bush, I think it was specifically for Refuge Recovery. I thought, you know, if one of my daughters had signed up for that retreat, and then all this thing went down, and then they showed up at the retreat, and then here's this person who's been asked to not teach while their sexual misconduct is being investigated, to have that person in charge of these people on such an intimate and vulnerable situation as a, you know, silent retreat, that's unconscionable. That's gross. That's disgusting. It's not safe. And so, you know, we have these systems in place. There's these, you know, the suspensions, there's removal of teaching, and yet this person is still going on. So I don't know. This is what I'm you know, my intention here. He shouldn't be teaching. Anybody that thinks he's still a good teacher, I would really think twice about that. There are a lot of other teachers that are not accused of these things. That would be a much safer container for you to study at and to explore your mind at. So, you know, and I'll say the other thing that really bothers me, and that I've seen firsthand within these communities, there are, you know, we're talking about people in recovery here within Refuge Recovery. You know, people that are fighting all kinds of addictions. Almost all addiction is trauma based. So we got people coming in with trauma. A lot of the women have sexual trauma. A lot, you know, and so there's this percentage of women that have reacted very strongly, that, you know, Noah's a bad guy, you know, Noah's unsafe, Noah shouldn't be teaching, I want no part of Noah. So there's that section. And then there's this other section that also have sexual trauma that seem to be completely drawn to him, that are supported. We stand with Noah. We're showing up at every retreat. We're with you, Noah. You need to keep teaching. You need to not listen to Spirit Rock. You need to not listen to these other people. We will support you. You know, and it's the same thing. It looks a little different, but it's still all based in trauma and pain. And, you know, for us to all stand idly by and to let this go on is, well, no, you know, just like I said early on, I can't allow this to go on. You know, and I'm going to be more vocal about this, and you know, I don't want anybody else to be harmed, period.
Well, and it seems like that crowd you're talking about that are so vociferously defending him, and I think we've alluded to, or started to allude to this at least, they are the ones who are demanding legal system level evidence to ouster or consider oustering Noah from his position. And as I believe Michelin said a little bit earlier when we were talking, that's not how this shit works. We're not in a court of law.
Yeah, teachers are on a different code of ethics that are way stricter than the state laws and the federal laws.
Exactly, and Spirit Rock made that very clear.
Period.
Like, here's the legal system.
I'm going to interrupt you in a minute.
Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to offer two different points of view, Gary, to your thoughts. And the first is, as a woman, I can tell you that people not listening to women's accusations is not simply perception. It is absolute fact. And it happens to women all the time. Women are talked over, women are attacked, women are ignored. Women have to fight to get their voices in, and then once their voices are in, are often analyzed to that legal nth degree and told these ridiculous things like, well, you know, what evidence you have? Like, people actually do this in front of cameras and then, you know, take notes while this happens. And so I do think that the idea that there's just a very small community that supports an authority in a case of sexual conduct is a little more than perception. I think there's a lot of fact to the idea that depending on how vocal you are, there may be a smaller vocal community, but there's sort of a tacit understream. And I do think it comes from Brent's ideas about hierarchical structure, but that's across the board. You know, you can have a loose structure and still have an abusive personality that's charismatic. You don't have to be a king to be set up for abuse. It can really happen anywhere where people are silent. And that's more the common thread. I think particularly in Western culture, where none of us are really taught how to speak truth to any kind of power or charisma, or really how to speak up. And so when women do that, it is something that's often batted away or created harmful for the person who has survived the trauma.
I agree with you 100%, by the way.
The other thing I would kind of like to address is this idea that if it hadn't been the sexual harm issue, it could have been any issue. And I want to say I don't agree with that per se, simply because sexual harm is its own issue. It matters, particularly to women. And it is a certain violation. You know, if this had just been money, I think this would have been different. If this had been, you know, in Shambhala, which is both revealing and tragic, suddenly now Shambhala is in tumble down mode because of a letter released where men talked about being bitten and physically abused. Now all of a sudden, oh, this is a real problem. The sacking really does have to go. You know, and so I think when you talk about sexual harm, that it is different by its nature, by what it does to the survivor, and by what it does and means in the community. You know, and so I do think that this amps up these scandals, this amps up this problem. And it does tend to come back to exactly what you talk about as a father, which is at some point you've got to say, should this person be in a position with other people? And I think that's the big question for these communities, isn't as much should these people really be teaching, because other than that vocal minority that you talk about, I think, you know, ATS has done, and I think in truth Shambhala has done the way it wanted to be. It's just taking a long time to get there because it's such a large organization and there's such a failure in leadership to take it any other direction. But eventually it's going to have to radically transform to stay alive in its current shape that it's in. I'm actually not a Shambhala member. I followed a teacher who was a Shambhala member and so was involved via my teacher. I'm a member in the Nyingma lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. And we are a hierarchical lineage. I have a female teacher. And, you know, I think that it really is about the structure and how you communicate. And, you know, in a lot of lineages in Tibetan Buddhism, you know, there is room for a difference of opinion. There is a room for doubt. There's room for questions in certain lineages, and in others there aren't. And so I don't think it's as much lineage. I think it really is communities. In both Shambhala and ATS, they're personality driven to the point of cultishness. And that's where this kind of abuse happens. And the question then to recover is exactly that. Just as people who go through recovery have usually come in because they've come from trauma, these people in these communities are going through spiritual trauma. And I think that's the utmost thing in reaching and in compassionate and altruistic intent toward all of these is we're not just dealing with angry people, we're not just dealing with people in denial, we're dealing with people who have endured spiritual betrayal and are going through a place of trauma. And that's harder to reach and requires great care.
I wouldn't mind saying something here. I've been listening to what everybody's saying and nodding my head along on a lot of this stuff. And one thing I do want to say is what Kelly had said about it being so prevalent with women. I don't want this to be a women versus men thing, because I don't think it should be. I think it should be a community thing. But at the same time, I don't think people can understand what it's like to be in someone else's shoes unless they've been there. You can kind of empathize a little bit with them, but it's different. And just as a quick example, even when I went with my daughter to buy her car, it's me and my daughter. And I also brought along the man that I'm dating. Now, he has nothing to do with buying the car. He's not buying the car. He's not my daughter's father. He's just there to kind of support us, to be there with us. But sure as hell, they kept talking to him the whole time with everything. And it's like, hello, okay, first of all, my daughter is the one who's actually buying the car with the money that she earned from her job at Starbucks, and I'm the mother. But every time they kept directing everything to him, and he kept telling them, like, I don't have anything to do with this. And that's just one minor example. I mean, there's millions we can do, but it's true that we're not heard sometimes, all the time, not even sometimes. We're not heard a lot. And so that shows up a lot when we're trying to say, hey, this happened. It's just like sometimes overlooked, or yeah. You know, so that's hard. It's very difficult. I did want to bring up that. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is what Gary was saying about how you don't always see the other side of the community. You know, you're seeing a lot of this on social media, anger and the frustration, which people should be angry. But I wonder sometimes, and we see this not only with this issue, but with political issues too, if social media isn't fanning flames that may not necessarily be there, pushing things, you know, they jump on these bandwagons like, yeah, you should say this. Yeah, you should say that, you know, and then there's all this anger. And because it's a digital screen, because it's just a comment on something, it spirals out of control. And then you've got this camp and that camp, and people sitting and actually listening to one another and saying, wait, let's step back. And okay, why don't we listen to this side? Why don't we listen to that side? So I wonder if social media is pushing it to levels that it doesn't necessarily have to be. I don't know if that's making any sense. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, it certainly could be. I mean, and that's why I brought up perception. Just that, you know, that people are using this social media to change the perception of how this is played out. And again, I don't know, not again, but you know, I want to be clear that you know, the only side that I stand with are with the women that are accused. You know, you know, and I would totally agree with you that they're silenced. And you know, and that's just as far as the legal issue, you know, the fact that the rape charge was dropped by the police, there's a lot of reasons why that could be dropped. We don't know. I mean, maybe that woman did not want to continue with the, you know, the endless questioning and to be, you know, to put out there on, you know, to be aggressively forced to state this trauma again and again and again. I mean, you know, there's a lot of reasons why. Not just because it could be untrue, you know what I mean? So, yeah, the one thing I'll say is if the Buddha was alive, he would say that Facebook is dukkha, You know, it's one of those, you know, double-edged sword. There's a lot of good done from it, and there's a lot of harm, you know, and it's abused, and it's, I don't like it, and I have to use it. It's the best form of promotion for different events that I do. So
I do think that's the thing about social media, is it doesn't always bring out the better angels of our nature. And yet without it, how many of these voices would be heard at all? I mean, imagine what happened in Shambhala if there were no social media. Who would know? Who would help? Who would get involved? Imagine Noah if it was just a woman who went to the police and it didn't come out in social media. So it is a double-edged sword in that way. You know, there is suffering, and there is a way to be free from suffering. And I think that it's what we do with it.
right. That's I guess, you know, that's the big thing that where I'm standing on this thing. You know, I just want to make sure that this doesn't happen again, you know, and you know, the more that we're vocal about it, you know, and again, I'm heavily involved with the Refuge recovery community. You know, within addiction communities, there's lots of predatory behavior. There's you know, newcomers are preyed upon. It's gross, right? It's horrible. It's disgusting, and we just need to keep bringing light to it. So, you know, just, you know, the power struggles, the thing about you know, teachers sleeping with students. That's you know, I guess another thing. Oh God, that the fact that all these things are being denied on Noah's side. Again, you know, where there was some openness to this, like, you know, he was saying that he was sorry for these women that feel these things, and he wasn't really taking responsibility. And now it's going back to like, this hasn't happened at all, and you know, that's just not true. And you know, to deny that this has not happened, to squash these women's truths is unconscionable. And you know, and we, you know, let's keep talking about this so it doesn't happen again.
So as someone who has gone through the facilitator training, Gary, please back me up with this. You know, I remember having the discussions with Noah in Facilitator 1 about when you sit on that cushion, you have a greater responsibility. And then to see this change, and then to say, you know, well, it wasn't with students. Well, and when he's, and in the first,
And that's not true, by the way.
You know what? I know. Yeah. But to say that, you know, Buddhism doesn't say anything about sexual promiscuity. And I was like, did you read the same third precept that I did? Because every single one of them, no matter what school you're in, the third precept says you don't do that. And it's not just about the other person, but it's also about you.
Right. Not to cause harm in all angles.
Right.
Yeah.
So self-harm or harm to others. So it's a double, and then like you said, long before any of this, long way back, around the time that the earth cooled, I worked as a rape crisis counselor for a very long time. And the number of cases that actually get brought all the way to charges being filed is so minuscule, it is beyond ridiculous. And if we look at cases like, you know, I should have his name right at my forefront, but the kid from Stanford, the most recent kid from Rice in Houston, you know, it's like they're getting 6 months not having to register as a sex offender, and, you know, 4 months and not having to, you know, 4 months of probation or some ridiculous crap. It's not a response that is, the punishment doesn't fit, the justice doesn't fit within the legal system. But again, we're not talking about the legal system, we're talking about the Buddhist system, because this is where the rubber really hits the road, especially within this community. We have a higher standard. We have a responsibility to the hierarchical lineage. And when our teachers say, you need to step away from teaching, you do that. You don't say, I'm going to continue to teach retreats, and I'm going to continue to teach, and I'm going to continue to lead. You take the time. Because as you said, and you know what, I know that you put it in the perspective of for your daughters, but for me, because really they call me Mama Bear because they're all my daughters. They're all my sons. I want to see no harm come to any of them. And then I get a little crazy when it does happen. So they're all our daughters, they're all our sons. And we have a responsibility within the Sangha to all of them, and to listen, to hear them, not to listen to respond. And it is super easy to sit behind the keyboard and throw all kinds of shade at all kinds of stuff, because there's a lot of bravery that happens from behind the keyboard. Sitting in my fuzzy slippers and my jammies at the house, I don't have to be out there with my face in the front. Here is where it starts to get personal and real. My face is out front. This is where it is.
Yeah, I think we should wrap up a little bit. We're just about out of time. I think this is a conversation that needs to continue happening. I mean, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if there is an answer. I think there are some key points here, like what Brent was bringing up with hierarchy, that is important. I think the cult-like mentality that tends to happen with spiritual leaders is another important point. And listening to people before we judge, which is something, ironically, these things that we're talking about are basic principles of Buddhism in the first place. You know, removing the ego, you know, community, listening to one another, thinking, or I don't know what I'm trying to say, but like
taking responsibility.
Thank you. Yes.
Absolutely.
Taking responsibility, thinking before you act, you know, stopping, pausing, all of that. And so I guess it just blows my mind that it's happening in a community where it shouldn't. So I guess final thoughts before we close. Anybody want to say anything?
Dana, I am very grateful that you put this together, because I think that this is important, and I do think it is a conversation that needs to continue to happen. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And I think my big thing that I'm trying to promote these days is, if you see something, say something.
Absolutely.
And I want to really echo what Micheline says. I think the more we do this, the more we have these discussions that are face-to-face or screen-to-screen, where you're there with that truth. This is the hope that these Sanghas have, is actual honest communication beyond the anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is one of those paths forward. So thank you for doing this. And thank you all for doing this too.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. It's I know it's just a podcast, but being able to see the people that you're speaking with face to face, and knowing that not only do you have to be able to back up your ideas, but you have to speak with some just intelligence and civility, because like we said before, you're not hiding behind a keyboard right now. We're speaking to other humans about human issues from a place, hopefully, of compassion and trying to understand. And that's something that I see failing more often than not. And I'm happy we were all a part of this evening.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. So we'll close now, and And maybe we'll revisit this again, hopefully sometime soon. So thank you again.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.